Jessica Williams woke up early that Tuesday morning, the same way she did every day. Her alarm rang at 5:30 a.m., and she was out of bed by 5:32. As a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, she had learned that discipline was key to success. She followed her usual morning routine, a quick run through her neighborhood, a shower, and a light breakfast while reviewing case notes. By 7:15, Jessica was dressed in her favorite navy blue suit, pearl earrings, and low heels. Professional but comfortable, perfect for a day that would include both office work and a quick trip to handle a personal matter. Just get it over with, she told herself as she grabbed her car keys. The minor traffic ticket she had received last month needed to be resolved today. Under normal circumstances, she would have simply paid the fine online, but there had been a system error, forcing her to appear in person at the county courthouse. Jessica arrived at the courthouse at 9:45 a.m. The traffic court was on the third floor, and as she walked through the metal detectors, she nodded politely to the security guards who recognized her from her frequent professional visits to other courtrooms in the building. "Different business today, Ms. Williams?" asked Officer Thompson with a friendly smile. "Just a traffic ticket," Jessica replied with a slight eye roll. "Should be quick." The traffic court was already crowded when she entered. Jessica took a seat in the back row and observed the proceedings. Judge Robert Keller presided over the court, a man in his 60s with thinning white hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He had been a judge for over 20 years and had a reputation for being strict but generally fair. Jessica watched as case after case moved efficiently. A young white college student explained that he didn't see the stop sign because of overgrown bushes. The judge reduced his fine by half. A middle-aged white woman had been ticketed for speeding, but Judge Keller accepted her explanation about rushing to pick up her sick child and gave her just a warning. When Jessica's name was finally called, she approached the bench with confidence. She had been in courtrooms hundreds of times, though usually on the other side of the proceedings. "Ms. Williams, you are charged with making an illegal turn at a market intersection. How do you plead?" Judge Keller barely looked up from her file. "Your Honor, I'd like to explain the circumstances." The sign was partially. Judge Keller cut her off. "I asked how you plead, Ms. Williams. Guilty or not guilty?" Jessica noticed the sharp tone that hadn't been present with previous defendants. "Guilty, Your Honor," but with an explanation. The judge's expression hardened. "Go ahead," he said, his voice notably colder than it had been all morning. The sign prohibiting turns during certain hours was partially obscured by a delivery truck. "I simply didn't see it, Your Honor." Judge Keller looked at her over his glasses, his eyes scanning her appearance with obvious judgment. "Ignorance of signage is not an excuse, Ms. Williams. The law applies to everyone equally." Jessica couldn't help but notice the irony in his statement, given what she had witnessed earlier. "I understand, Your Honor. I'm merely explaining the circumstances." "That will be a fine of $250, the maximum for this violation." The judge's voice was firm and dismissive. Jessica blinked in surprise. The white college student with the missed stop sign had only been fined $75. The difference in treatment was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. As Jessica reached for her wallet, she could feel eyes on her. The courthouse clerk looked uncomfortable. A few observers in the gallery exchanged glances. Everyone had seen what happened. Little did Judge Keller know, this apparent case of bias was happening to the wrong person on the wrong day. Jessica stood at the payment counter, carefully controlling her expression. After 15 years as a federal prosecutor, she had become expert at hiding her emotions in challenging situations. But inside, she was both angry and disappointed. "That will be $250, said the clerk, a middle-aged woman named Martha who couldn't quite meet Jessica's eyes. "Would you like to pay with cash or card?" "Card, please," Jessica replied, reaching into her purse for her wallet. As she handed over her credit card, she noticed Martha's uncomfortable expression. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," Martha whispered, glancing toward the courtroom door to make sure no one was listening. "I've worked here for 12 years, and I've never seen Judge Keller give the maximum fine for a first-time minor traffic violation." Jessica nodded slightly but kept her professional composure. It's interesting how justice can look different depending on who's standing before the bench. While waiting for her receipt, Jessica observed 3 other people who had been in the courtroom watching her with sympathetic expressions. One woman, a court reporter Jessica recognized from federal court, approached her. Jessica, Jessica Williams. I thought that was you, said the court reporter, Diane Miller. I was filling in here today. What I just saw in there. She shook her head. It wasn't right. Thank you, Diane, Jessica replied quietly. It's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. As they spoke, a young law clerk exited the courtroom and hurried over to them. Ms. Williams, I work for Judge Standerson in Circuit Court. What just happened in there was completely inappropriate. Several of us noticed. Jessica thanked them both for their support. This happens more often than people realize, she said. The difference is, most people don't have witnesses or the legal knowledge to recognize when they're being treated unfairly. The court session had taken a brief recess, and people were filing out of the courtroom. Among them was Martin Chen, a defense attorney Jessica had faced several times in federal cases. Williams, what are you doing in traffic court? He asked, surprised to see her there. Just handling a minor traffic ticket, she replied. Or at least, it should have been minor. Chen frowned. I saw what happened. Keller gave the college kid a reduced fine for running a stop sign, but gave you the maximum for a simple illegal turn. That's not right. No, it's not, Jessica agreed. But it happens every day. What are you going to do about it? Chen asked, lowering his voice. Jessica considered the question carefully. As a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights cases, she knew exactly what legal options existed. She could file a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Commission. She could collect statements from witnesses. She could request courtroom records to establish a pattern of behavior. I'm not sure yet, she answered honestly, but I know doing nothing isn't an option. As they talked, one of the courthouse security officers approached Jessica. Ms. Williams, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Jessica excused herself and followed the officer, Officer James Taylor, to a quiet corner. I know who you are, Taylor said quietly. I've seen you in federal court handling those big civil rights cases. Judge Keller has a reputation. This wasn't an isolated incident. I suspected as much, Jessica replied. Many of us have seen it happen over and over. People of color getting harsher penalties, less patience, fewer breaks. But nobody with enough power has ever been on the receiving end before, Taylor explained. Jessica's phone buzzed with a message from her office. She needed to get back for an important meeting about an ongoing case. I appreciate you telling me this, Jessica said, her mind already working on what steps to take next. Sometimes it takes experiencing something firsthand to truly understand what others have been saying all along. As Jessica left the courthouse, she knew this wasn't going to be just another traffic ticket payment. What had happened in that courtroom would not stay in that courtroom. Judge Keller had no idea who he had just revealed his biases to, or what she was capable of doing about it. Jessica returned to her office at the U.S. Attorney's Building by 11:30 a.m. She had a stack of cases waiting for her review and a team meeting at 1:00 p.m., but her encounter with Judge Keller kept replaying in her mind. Everything okay, Jess? Asked Marcus Washington, her colleague and friend of 10 years. You look like you're ready to prosecute someone. Jessica smiled slightly. Just had an interesting morning in traffic court. Traffic court? Don't tell me the great Jessica Williams got a ticket, Marcus teased. Not just a ticket, Jessica replied, but apparently the maximum possible fine for it too. She described the morning's events, watching Marcus's expression change from amusement to concern and then anger. That's straight-up discrimination, he said when she finished. You should file a complaint. I'm thinking about it, Jessica answered. But I need to be strategic. Jessica closed her office door and opened her laptop. Instead of immediately diving into her casework, she began researching Judge Robert Keller. After 30 minutes, she had compiled some troubling information. Keller had been on the bench for 22 years. There had been 3 previous complaints about potential racial bias, but all had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. A knock on her door interrupted her research. It was her assistant, Kevin. Jessica, there's someone here to see you. Says she works at the county courthouse and it's urgent. Jessica was surprised to see Martha, the clerk from traffic court, standing nervously in the reception area. Ms. Williams, I hope you don't mind me coming here, Martha said, her voice low. I looked up where you worked. I needed to tell you something about Judge Keller. Jessica led Martha to a small conference room where they could speak privately. After you left, Judge Keller was reviewing the day's payments. Martha explained, twisting her hands in her lap. He saw your business card that was accidentally printed on the back of your receipt. Martha took a deep breath before continuing. When he realized you're a federal prosecutor, he called me into his chambers. He was upset. He wanted to know if you had said anything about how he treated you. What did you tell him? Jessica asked. I said you were professional and didn't complain. But then he said something that I think you should know. Martha looked around nervously. He said, "These people always think they're special. Badge or no badge, they need to learn to follow rules like everyone else." Jessica kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing. Thank you for telling me this, Martha. It must have taken courage to come here. I've worked in that courthouse for years, Martha said. I've seen how he treats people differently, but I've never said anything because I need my job. But today, she shook her head. It was just too obvious, and then when he found out who you are, he seemed worried. As Martha was leaving, Jessica's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Diane Miller, the court reporter. Jessica, I just heard something you should know, Diane said without preamble. Judge Keller is asking questions about you. When he found out you're with the U.S. Attorney's Office, he called the chief judge. I overheard him saying he felt you were confrontational in court and that you might try to cause trouble. Jessica thanked Diane for the information. No sooner had she hung up than her phone buzzed again with a text from Officer Taylor. Keller just found out who you are. He's in damage control mode. Jessica sat at her desk, processing all this new information. Judge Keller was clearly rattled upon discovering her position. His immediate attempt to rewrite the narrative, claiming she had been confrontational when the entire courtroom had witnessed his behavior, was telling. Her office phone rang again. This time it was her boss, U.S. Attorney Samuel Richards. Jessica, do you know a Judge Robert Keller? He asked. I had the pleasure just this morning, Jessica replied carefully. Well, he just called me, Richards said. Wanted to give me a heads up about a misunderstanding in his courtroom with one of my prosecutors. Care to tell me what's really going on? Jessica smiled slightly. Judge Keller had no idea what he had just set in motion. The very power dynamics he had tried to exploit in his courtroom were about to shift dramatically. Actually, sir, she said, I think we need to have a serious conversation about systemic bias in the county courthouse. U.S. Attorney Samuel Richards listened carefully as Jessica explained the morning's events. His expression grew progressively more serious as she detailed not just her own experience, but also the supporting accounts from the clerk, the court reporter, and the security officer. So Judge Keller called me to get ahead of this, Richards said, leaning back in his chair. He claimed you were unnecessarily confrontational and might be overreacting to routine judicial discretion. Jessica raised an eyebrow. I hardly spoke 10 sentences in his courtroom. Richards nodded. I believe you. I've known you for 8 years, Jessica. You're one of my most level-headed prosecutors. He tapped his pen thoughtfully against his desk. The question is, what do we do now? Keller has friends in high places. He and Judge Harrington play golf together every weekend, and Harrington is on the Judicial Review Board. This isn't about me, Jessica said firmly. If this is how he treated a federal prosecutor in a suit, imagine how he treats defendants who don't have my credentials or resources. Before Richards could respond, his assistant knocked on the door. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Ms. Diana Miller on line 2. She says it's urgent and related to what you're discussing with Ms. Williams. Richards put the call on speaker. Ms. Miller, you're on with both myself and Jessica Williams. Thank you for taking my call, Diana said. I wanted you both to know that I've just been removed from court reporting duties in Judge Keller's courtroom. The official reason is scheduling adjustments, but it happened immediately after I was seen speaking with Ms. Williams. Jessica and Richards exchanged concerned glances. That's not all, Diana continued. I've been quietly keeping records of sentencing disparities in traffic court for almost a year. I started noticing patterns in how different defendants were treated. I have spreadsheets documenting fines and outcomes based on demographics. That could be extremely valuable information, Jessica said, sitting forward. Would you be willing to share it? That's why I'm calling, Diana replied. I think it's time someone did something with this data. After the call ended, Richards looked at Jessica thoughtfully. This is bigger than one incident. It always is, Jessica said quietly. By 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, word had spread throughout the legal community. Jessica's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from lawyers, courthouse employees, and even former defendants who had appeared before Judge Keller. Martin Chen, the defense attorney from traffic court, called with news. Keller's in full panic mode. He just dismissed all the cases on his afternoon docket with minimal fines. Word is that he heard the U.S. Attorney's Office might be looking into him. Officer Taylor texted, Judge called emergency meeting with courthouse security. Wanted to know who's been talking to you. Nobody said a word. At 5:15 p.m., Jessica was surprised to receive a call from Judge Sandra Patel, the only woman of color on the county bench. Ms. Williams, I heard about what happened this morning. Judge Patel said. This isn't the first time concerns have been raised about Judge Keller. 3 years ago, a public defender tried to document similar patterns, but the complaint was buried. What happened to the public defender? Jessica asked. She was assigned to a different courthouse across the county. Very inconvenient commute. She eventually left for private practice. By the time Jessica left the office that evening, what had started as a simple traffic ticket that snowballed into something much larger. She had received 17 emails from people wanting to share their experiences with Judge Keller, including 3 from attorneys of color and 5 from former defendants. As she drove home, Jessica's phone rang through her car speakers. It was Martha, the court clerk. Ms. Williams, I just wanted to let you know that Judge Keller spent the afternoon pulling records of every case you've ever handled as prosecutor. He's looking for anything he can use against you. Jessica wasn't surprised. Thank you for the warning, Martha. There's something else, Martha said, her voice dropping. Judge Keller doesn't know this, but his clerk accidentally left a recording device on after a meeting. He was talking to Judge Harrington, saying they needed to put this prosecutor in her place and remind her who runs the courts in this county. Jessica took a deep breath. Martha, would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you witnessed? There was a long pause. I could lose my job. You might, Jessica acknowledged, but sometimes justice requires courage. After another long pause, Martha replied, I'll do it. Some things are more important than a job. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the U.S. Attorney's Office earlier than usual. By 7:00 a.m., she was already reviewing the documentation Diana Miller had sent over. The spreadsheets contained 18 months of data from Judge Keller's courtroom, meticulously categorizing outcomes by race, gender, age, and representation status. The numbers told a disturbing story. Black defendants received maximum fines 73% of the time, compared to just 17% for white defendants with similar violations. The average fine for Latino defendants was $178, while white defendants averaged $89 for the same offenses. This is exactly what we need, Jessica murmured to herself as she analyzed the patterns. Her concentration was broken by a knock on her door. It was Marcus. You're here early, he said. But not as early as Samuel. He's been making calls since 6:00 a.m. About Judge Keller? Marcus nodded. It's bigger than just Keller now. The chief federal judge wants to meet with you at 9:00 a.m. Jessica was surprised. Chief Judge Eleanor Montgomery rarely got involved in matters outside the federal court system. Why would the chief federal judge care about a county traffic court judge? Jessica asked. Because, Marcus said, leaning against her doorframe, 5 civil rights cases from our office in the past 3 years involved defendants who were previously sentenced by Keller. If his bias affected those cases, it could impact federal prosecutions. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Jessica walked into Chief Judge Montgomery's chambers. The judge was a formidable woman in her 60s who had broken numerous barriers throughout her career. Ms. Williams, Judge Montgomery said, motioning for Jessica to sit. I understand you had an enlightening experience in traffic court. Yes, Your Honor, Jessica replied, though I believe what I experienced was just the tip of the iceberg. Samuel Richards was also present, along with the head of the Civil Rights Division, Michael Torres. We've reviewed the preliminary data, Torres said. It's compelling, but we need to be careful about how we proceed. Judge Keller has powerful allies. I'm more concerned about the people who don't have powerful allies, Jessica responded. The people who appear in his court every day without legal representation or knowledge of their rights. Judge Montgomery nodded approvingly. Well said, Ms. Williams. That's precisely why I called this meeting. The judge opened a folder on her desk. 3 years ago, a federal investigation into courthouse discrimination was quietly shut down after political pressure. I never agreed with that decision. She looked directly at Jessica. You've inadvertently given us the opportunity to reopen that investigation with new evidence. By noon, things were moving quickly. Jessica had been temporarily reassigned to work directly with the Civil Rights Division on the investigation. The courthouse was buzzing with rumors. At 1:30 p.m., Martha called Jessica. Judge Keller knows something's happening, she said, her voice shaking slightly. He just canceled all his cases for the rest of the week, citing health concerns. Are you okay, Martha? Jessica asked, concerned for the clerk's well-being. I'm scared, but I'm okay, Martha replied. I gave my official statement this morning to an investigator. It felt good to finally tell the truth. At 3:45 p.m., Jessica received an unexpected visit from Officer Taylor and 2 other courthouse security officers. We want to help, Taylor said simply. We've been watching this happen for years. We have our own documentation, dates, times, specific incidents. We've been keeping notes, hoping someone would care enough to do something. One of the other officers, an older man named Peterson, spoke up. I've worked security at that courthouse for 19 years. What Judge Keller did to you happens every single day to people who can't fight back. By the end of the day, 17 current and former courthouse employees had come forward with statements. The Judicial Conduct Commission had officially opened an investigation, and Judge Keller had hired a high-profile defense attorney. As Jessica drove home that evening, her phone rang. It was Samuel Richards. Jessica, Judge Keller just filed a formal complaint against you, claiming you're orchestrating a witch hunt because you're angry about a traffic ticket. Jessica couldn't help but laugh. He really doesn't get it, does he? No, Richards replied. But he will soon. The state attorney general just called me. They're expanding the investigation to include all judges in the county courthouse. Jessica smiled to herself. What had started as an unfair fine had uncovered something much more significant, a chance for real systemic change. Judge Keller had picked the wrong person to discriminate against, but the right person to finally expose the truth. 3 days after Jessica's traffic court appearance, the local media got hold of the story. The headline in the County Times read, Federal Investigation. Jessica's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Former defendants wanted to share their stories. Even judges from neighboring counties called to express support. Privately, of course. I never wanted to be the face of this, Jessica told Marcus as they walked to the courthouse for a scheduled meeting with the Judicial Conduct Commission. This was supposed to be about the system, not about me. Sometimes it takes a face for people to care about a system, Marcus replied. And like it or not, you're that face now. The meeting room was packed when they arrived. Representatives from the state attorney general's office, the Judicial Conduct Commission, and the county's administrative offices filled the chairs around the large oak table. Jessica took her seat next to Michael Torres from the Civil Rights Division. Across from them sat Judge Keller's attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit named Lawrence Blackwell. Before we begin, Blackwell announced, my client wishes it to be known that he categorically denies any allegations of bias or impropriety. This entire investigation stems from a single disgruntled individual who was upset about a traffic ticket. Michael Torres slid a thick binder across the table. Then your client will be interested in explaining these statistics, which show consistent disparities in sentencing over a period of 18 months. The head of the Judicial Conduct Commission, a stern woman named Patricia Reynolds, adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the data. Mr. Blackwell, these numbers are troubling. But even more concerning are the 17 sworn statements we've received from courthouse employees. Blackwell maintained his composure. My client has served this community for over 20 years. His record speaks for itself. Yes, Jessica spoke for the first time. It certainly does. After the meeting, as Jessica was leaving the courthouse, she noticed a group of people gathered on the steps. They were holding signs that read Justice for All and End Courtroom Bias. Some of them were former defendants from Judge Keller's courtroom. A young black woman approached Jessica. "Ms. Williams, I'm Tanya Moore. Judge Keller gave me 30 days in jail last year for a simple traffic violation when I couldn't pay the fine. I lost my job because of it." Jessica listened as Tanya shared her story, one that was becoming distressingly familiar. Before long, others joined them, each with similar experiences. "What can we do to help?" asked a middle-aged man who had spent 3 days in jail for a parking ticket he couldn't afford to pay. "Share your stories," Jessica told them. "The commission needs to hear from everyone affected." That evening, Jessica received a call from U.S. Attorney Richards. "Judge Keller wants to meet with you privately," Richards said. His attorney reached out about a potential resolution. "What kind of resolution?" Jessica asked skeptically. He didn't specify, but he mentioned that Keller is concerned about where this investigation might lead. Jessica thought carefully before responding. Any meeting would need to be official, with proper witnesses and documentation. "Agreed," Richards said. "I've already told them you'll only meet with all relevant parties present." The next morning, Jessica received an unexpected visitor at her office. It was Judge Sandra Paddle. "I wanted to thank you personally," Judge Paddle said once they were seated in Jessica's office. "What you're doing isn't easy." "I wasn't looking for this fight," Jessica admitted. "The best ones never are," Judge Paddle replied with a small smile. "But there's something you should know. 3 years ago, when the previous investigation was shut down, it wasn't just about Keller. 5 judges in the county were showing similar patterns." Jessica leaned forward. "Do you have documentation?" Judge Paddle placed a flash drive on Jessica's desk. "I've been collecting evidence for years, waiting for the right opportunity." As Judge Paddle turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Judge Keller will try to make this about you, Ms. Williams. He'll attack your character, your professionalism, your motives. Are you prepared for that?" Jessica thought about all the people who had already come forward. Martha risking her job, Tanya sharing her painful experience, Officer Taylor standing up to his superiors. "It's not about me," Jessica said firmly. "It never was. It's about everyone who entered that courtroom before me and everyone who will enter it after me." Judge Paddle nodded approvingly. "The hearing is set for next Monday. The whole legal community will be watching." "Let them watch," Jessica replied. "Sometimes justice needs an audience." "Ms. Williams, are you pursuing personal damages?" called another. Jessica kept walking, her expression calm and professional. Richards answered for her. "We have no comment at this time. The proceedings will speak for themselves." Inside, the hearing room was packed to capacity. The 7 members of the Judicial Conduct Commission sat at the front, their faces serious. To the right sat Lawrence Blackwell, Judge Keller's attorney. The judge himself was notably absent. "His absence speaks volumes," whispered Torres to Jessica as they took their seats. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Commissioner Patricia Reynolds called the hearing to order. "This commission is convened to review allegations of judicial misconduct against Judge Robert Keller. We will hear testimony from witnesses and examine evidence regarding patterns of potentially discriminatory behavior." Blackwell immediately stood. "Madam Commissioner, before we proceed, I must object to the scope of this hearing. My client agreed to address a single incident involving Ms. Williams, not a sweeping investigation of his entire career." Commissioner Reynolds peered over her glasses at him. "Mr. Blackwell, your client doesn't set the parameters of this commission's investigation. The evidence presented warranted a comprehensive review." The first witness called was Diana Miller. She walked to the front confidently, carrying a thick binder of documentation. "Ms. Miller, please explain your role at the courthouse and what you observed," Commissioner Reynolds directed. Diana opened her binder. "I've been a court reporter for 15 years. For the past 18 months, I documented every case in Judge Keller's courtroom, noting the race of defendants, their charges, and their sentences." She presented her findings clearly, with charts showing the stark disparities. Black defendants were 3 times more likely to receive maximum penalties than white defendants for identical offenses. Latino defendants were twice as likely to have their explanations cut short by the judge. Blackwell's cross-examination was aggressive. "Isn't it true you have a personal grudge against Judge Keller because he criticized your work last year?" Diana remained composed. He did criticize my work for accurately transcribing his inappropriate comments to a young black female attorney. Next came Martha, visibly nervous but determined. She described the incident with Jessica and then detailed dozens of similar occurrences she had witnessed over her years as a clerk. The day after Ms. Williams appeared in court, Martha testified, "Judge Keller told me, people like her need to learn their place. When I asked what he meant by people like her, he just gave me a look and said, 'You know exactly what I mean.'" Throughout the morning, witness after witness took the stand: court officers, attorneys, former defendants. Each account built upon the previous ones, creating an undeniable pattern. After lunch, it was Jessica's turn. As she approached the witness chair, she noticed Tanya Moore and several other former defendants sitting together in the audience. They nodded encouragingly at her. "Ms. Williams," Commissioner Reynolds began, "please describe your experience in Judge Keller's courtroom." Jessica recounted the events simply and factually, without embellishment or emotion. She described the difference in how previous defendants had been treated and how the judge had cut her off and issued the maximum fine without consideration. "And what happened after you left the courtroom?" the commissioner asked. "I was approached by multiple courthouse employees who told me this was a pattern of behavior they had observed for years." Blackwell's cross-examination was brutal. "Isn't it true, Ms. Williams, that this entire investigation is your attempt to retaliate against a judge who simply enforced the law?" Jessica remained calm. "This investigation began because 17 courthouse employees independently came forward with evidence of systematic discrimination. My experience was merely the catalyst." "And you expect us to believe you didn't use your position as a federal prosecutor to pressure these employees?" Blackwell pressed. Before Jessica could answer, Commissioner Reynolds intervened. "Mr. Blackwell, that's enough. The record shows these witnesses came forward voluntarily." By late afternoon, the commission had heard from 23 witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming. As the hearing concluded for the day, Commissioner Reynolds made an unexpected announcement. "Based on the testimony and evidence presented today, this commission is expanding its investigation to include 4 additional judges in this county. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. As Jessica left the courthouse, she noticed Judge Keller's attorney on his phone, his face pale. The first day of the hearing had just ended, but it was clear that a much larger reckoning had only just begun. 6 months after the fateful traffic court appearance, Jessica stood at the podium in the newly renovated county courthouse lobby. Behind her hung a large banner that read, "Equal Justice Initiative, Courthouse Reform Project." Cameras flashed as reporters gathered for the press conference. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our justice system," Jessica began, her voice clear and confident. "What started as a single incident has led to meaningful, systemic change." The investigation that began with Judge Keller had revealed widespread disparities throughout the county court system. 3 judges had resigned, including Keller himself. 2 others were on probation, required to have their sentencing decisions reviewed monthly by a special oversight committee. "The reforms we announced today are not about punishment," Jessica continued. "They are about creating a justice system that truly lives up to its name." Samuel Richards stepped forward to outline the changes. "Every courtroom in this county will now use a blind sentencing approach for minor offenses. Judges will receive case details without demographic information about defendants. Additionally, all sentencing data will be publicly available online for citizens to review." In the audience, Martha sat proudly. She had been promoted to chief clerk, tasked with implementing many of the new transparency measures. Beside her was Diana Miller, now heading a new court monitoring program. Officer Taylor and his colleagues stood along the wall, their new badges displaying the words Courthouse Integrity Unit, a team specifically created to report violations of the new fairness protocols. Judge Sandra Patel, recently appointed as chief administrative judge for the county, stepped to the microphone. "We cannot change the past, but we can learn from it. The courage of those who came forward has given us the opportunity to build a better system." After the formal presentations, Jessica greeted the many people who had been part of the journey. Tanya Moore approached with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Williams, they expunged my record," Tanya said, her voice breaking with emotion. "The review panel found that my sentence was clearly discriminatory. I can apply for jobs again without that hanging over me." Jessica smiled warmly. That's exactly why this work matters. As the crowd thinned, a young black law student approached Jessica hesitantly. Ms. Williams, I'm Jordan Taylor. I've been following your case since it hit the news. It's the reason I decided to stay in law school. How so? Jessica asked. I almost quit after my first year, Jordan explained. I kept facing these subtle forms of bias, and I started thinking maybe the system was too broken to fix. But then I saw what happened here, how one person could create real change. It gave me hope. Jessica nodded understandingly. The system isn't perfect, Jordan, but it can be improved, piece by piece, by people who care enough to fight for it. Later that evening, Jessica returned to her office to find a small celebration organized by her colleagues. Marcus handed her a glass of champagne. To Jessica, he toasted, who turned a traffic ticket into a revolution. Jessica laughed. Hardly a revolution, just a necessary correction. Her phone buzzed with a message from Martha. You should see the traffic court today. Judge Wilson gave the same fine to everyone, regardless of race or status. It's working. As the celebration continued around her, Jessica stepped away to her office window. She could see the courthouse in the distance, its lights glowing in the early evening darkness. She thought about Judge Keller, who had ultimately resigned rather than face further investigation. His last statement to the press had been defiant. I treated everyone the same. This was a witch hunt led by someone who couldn't accept a simple traffic fine. He never understood that it wasn't about the fine. It was about dignity, fairness, and equal treatment under the law, principles that should have been at the core of his work. Jessica's phone rang. It was Judge Montgomery from the federal court. I just read about the reforms, the judge said. Impressive work, Ms. Williams. Thank you, Your Honor, but there's still so much to do. There always will be, Judge Montgomery replied. That's why we need people like you to do it. As Jessica ended the call, she looked at the framed traffic ticket she had hung on her wall, a simple piece of paper that had started it all. Below it, she had placed a small plaque with words that now guided her work and the county's reformed court system. Justice is not just what happens in the courtroom, it's what everyone sees happening in the courtroom.